Okay, so this is my final evaluation for my project as a whole. I've got a few questions written down which I am going to answer for different sections of my project, and then I'll evaluate my final sculpt. So to start off with planning and pre-production. Did you create a mood board and mind map to plan the project? I did. I had a mood board that included subsections like learning process, which was images of the videos I plan to use to study for my sculpting. I had inspiration, which was images mainly from ArtStation that I liked the look of and I took inspiration from with my work. And then I had characters I'd like to sculpt, which were just images of some of the characters from my favourite games, shows and franchises. My mind map included a large amount of subjects ranging from issues I may face, hardware and software wise, to comparing the 3 industry standard programs for sculpting, which were Blender, Maya and ZBrush, some of the positives and the negatives of all of them, and then deciding which one I'd stick with. I also did things like the learning process as well, speaking about how I could find ways to learn using things like articles, YouTube, free courses online maybe, and things like that. Did the mood board and mind map help? Yes and no. I referred back to my mood board a few times over the project, but once I'd done my mind map and written about it, it was never really used again. Everything on my mind map is just opinions of mine, so it's always something I actively refer back to in my head. Like, I don't really refer back to the actual mind map. What further planning could you have done to support and help yourself and your project? In general, I'm not someone who plans out in detail how I'm going to approach work. I just get given an objective and I work towards it. It's a negative for any course I take, with it being so important that you explain your thought process and how you plan on approaching your work. It's likely something that's going to improve over time as I get older. I may end up planning things out more effectively. However, right now, I still don't tend to do it unless I'm actively encouraged to. I could have given myself deadlines for certain parts of the project to give myself added pressure to finish things on time, as well as plan out when I was aiming to do more sculpt practices, because I feel like I didn't get enough time to do that. What would you have done differently with your planning? I think I should have asked people close to me, as well as my tutors, how they approach planning in terms of personal projects, to see if I could come up with a more effective method of doing it myself. Seeing as I don't really tend to do it in my personal life, I don't really plan how I'm going to approach work. The way I usually do it is just decide what tasks will be easiest and do them first before tackling the harder ones over time. But realistically, you should probably get the harder ones out of the way first and work on the easier ones over time. But I think I may still be in that kind of high school mindset where you go to a lesson, you're given a task and you do the task and then you're finished for the day for that subject. I don't really have that long-term planning mindset just yet, but like I said, it's probably something that's going to come over time as I do more of this kind of thing. So that's that for the planning and pre-production. Now on to the progress and skills. What have you struggled with or found easy? So surprisingly, I think I found the realism side of sculpting easier than the stylized side, which doesn't at all tend to be the trend that goes on with my other work in terms of art. I'm usually very bad at realistic art. Which is why for my final piece I felt quite disappointed that I was struggling to achieve the stylized look of Hanzo from Overwatch. However, I was already too far into it to change my plans. I think had I decided to take the route of studying people and anatomy and using celebrities or important people from history to base my sculpts on, I think I may have seen better results. This isn't to say that I can't do this in the future, but for this project specifically, I think if I'd taken a different route, my work would have come out a lot better. I do plan to further study anatomy, reading books on it and stuff, and I do plan on continuing to sculpt in the future. So this may be something I see in it as an improvement over time. I've only really been sculpting for 2 months, so my work by far isn't terrible. However, I was certainly disappointed. What have you learned? So I've learned the basic workflow and an understanding of digital sculpting and how to approach it through doing practices. I've learned that there's 2 types of digital sculpting, stylized and realistic. And I seem to be stronger in the realistic area of sculpting. I began to learn some basic anatomy in order to create a torso sculpt, and also touched a bit on procedural texturing as well as texture painting. I also progressed my skills in box modelling more than I expected as well, and did quite a lot of it during this project. And in general, I don't think I've made bad progress over 2 months, with this being the first time I've actually done a modelling project on this course. And yeah, sculpting's certainly something I'm interested in continuing practicing. You can't learn stuff like this overnight, so I'm definitely interested in continuing it. And I was definitely right with the decision of choosing this subject, thinking it would be something fun to learn. It's probably one of the funnest ways I've tried 3D modelling. I don't enjoy traditional 3D modelling too much, but sculpting's definitely been more fun. Okay, now on to the research section. So, did you do enough research? I believe I did enough secondary research. I completed my entire checklist and spoke on every subject in plenty of detail. However, my primary research may have been lacking quite a bit. I feel like working remotely definitely didn't help for this project, as I would have gotten a lot more feedback in person in class. Just through things like in-class conversations where people spectate you doing your work and they decide to ask you a question about what you're doing, you can use that as primary research and you can write down there whatever they spoke to you about. If they've asked you a question and you've given them an answer and they've given you their opinion on your work, you can use that as primary research. But I didn't really have that with this project. And I don't like to pester people in their emails asking their opinions. I'd rather not be a hassle and bother anyone. And I don't really speak to anybody outside of college, so it was very hard for me to ask for opinions other than questionnaires, which I can send out to the whole class at once if I want to. How has your research helped develop your ideas? So I researched a large amount of tutorials to use and used many of them in my practices, recording the process and writing about it afterwards. This media research helped expose me to a lot of videos I hadn't previously seen or known about, which led to me learning more from different sources, which is always a good thing. It's always good to learn a subject from a variety of sources because different people have their own unique workflows and you can take inspiration from the way they work within a software or within a practical subject as well. Did you ask the right questions in your primary research? Yes and no. I always struggled to think of questions for my primary research questionnaire or focus group. Primary research can also come from just having classroom discussions, like I mentioned before, or chats with a classmate while they see what you're working on. I feel like my questionnaire was pretty short, but I really couldn't think of many questions for my questionnaire. I was struggling quite a lot. I ended up just asking what kind of style I should go for in my final piece. But did those research results really apply to my final piece? No, not really. The results encouraged me to go for a more realistic style over a stylized style, and I unintentionally ended up going for a stylized kind of look, and they also encouraged me to do more procedural texturing when that didn't really apply to this character specifically. Had I chose the character like the Wraith Prestige skin that was on my mood board, I'll put a picture of it up now, that could have used more procedural because there's the things such as the galaxy kind of look to the hair and things like that. That definitely could have used more procedural texturing. However, Hanzo, it didn't really apply to Hanzo. If I were to do the research again, I don't really know what I'd do differently. It's just unfortunate that I've had to work remotely for this project. It's not really ideal. I feel like my primary research would have just been a lot stronger if I could have just asked people in person. Because people will certainly give you different answers if you can literally just show them your work on your screen and just present it to them right there and then. But I can only do so much over the internet, such as just showing screenshots, etc. And people don't often give their opinions on that type of thing. If you leave a box on a questionnaire, you often won't get any responses in it. I only got 4 out of 21 responses for mine. So unless you make it a requirement, people just don't really tend to leave a response there. However, if you ask them in person, they're going to have to engage in the conversation with you, so you will definitely get more responses that way. Okay, so now on to the final piece, comparing the original plan to the final product. It didn't really go as I hoped. There are actually 2 attempts of my Hanzo sculpt. The first one was even worse than the second one, so I'm definitely glad I decided to give it another go instead of spending more time on the original. For some reason, I just couldn't transfer the shape of Hanzo's face from my references to the sculpt. I had a conversation with my mother about it, and she said there's some times where you'll come across a character that you just simply cannot draw, model, or anything. You just can't really compute the look of their face, etc. So she said don't worry about it. But I was definitely disappointed. I feel like it's still a good model, it just doesn't really look like what I was going for. I still think it is a good sculpt. I'm still quite proud of it. I'm proud of the way I did the hair using curves and stuff. That was something I hadn't done before. That was another practice I did following a tutorial. It was very interesting, using pretty much box modeling techniques to mold the hair, which is pretty cool. I spent a lot of time doing that. The face just doesn't really look like Hanzo, so I was quite disappointed to it. For the facial hair, I just could not figure out how I was going to approach that, so I ended up just not doing it. In total, between the 2 attempts, I spent about 7 hours on this work. About 2 hours on the first attempt. I did not get very far with that attempt, but I was just trying to figure out how I was going to do things. Then for the second one, I just focused for a good 5 hours on it, and I'm still pretty happy with it. It just doesn't look like Hanzo, but like I said, I still think it is a pretty high quality model. I'm just obviously quite disappointed. I often get too big for my boots with things like this and aim for things that aren't reachable yet. So say I did this Hanzo sculpt 2 more months down the line, further practicing, I may be able to do it by then, but currently it's not in my ability, it seems. If I were to do the final piece again, I would not do a video game character. I would instead try and seek inspiration from a well-known person, a celebrity, or some kind of person in history, just so there's a lot of reference images I can gather of that person, a lot of different angles I can see. Because there's nothing wrong with my strength seeming to be in the realistic side of sculpting. I'm not going to settle on saying that it is in the realistic side of sculpting, because obviously I've only had 2 months of practice and I feel like my skills could develop further down the line anyway. But there's nothing wrong with me seemingly being stronger in the realistic side of sculpting. There's nothing to say a studio can't still use that strength, because video games are becoming more realistic as time goes on anyway. But yeah, with this project as a whole, I'm very happy with it. I'm not expected to be perfect instantly. There can obviously be flaws in my work, there's nothing wrong with that. And I definitely will continue sculpting. It's probably going to be a little side hobby I pick up, because I've definitely had fun with it and I would like to learn more about it. Gonna further research into anatomy and stuff, because that can only benefit me as an artist in every single aspect of art. Anatomy is important in every single medium of art if you are planning to draw people. But yeah, as a whole, I'm proud of what I've learned, I've had fun with it, and that's all that matters at the end of the day. That's the end of my final evaluation for the FMP 2023. Thank you for listening.